Let's open up this discussion and go to London, where we're joined by Philip Idaewor. He's the chairman of the UK chapter of Nigeria's ruling party, the All Progressive Congress. And also in London is political analyst and Nigerian affairs specialist Kayode Ogundamisi. Gentlemen, I thank you very much for joining us. Let me start with you, Philip.
Thank you.
This idea that almost 500 people have been released, is that a good sign?
I think so. I think it's a good sign that things are being done and in the right way as well. These people that have been released are not considered to be high security individuals, and these are people that have been properly assessed, psychoanalyzed, and plans being made for their rehabilitation. So I think that it's a good sign that, unlike in the past, the present government is doing quite a bit, not just in terms of winning the battle on the war front, but also ensuring that the community as well as the population involved in this disaster is being taken care of.
Philip, help me understand. If they've been found innocent, and some of them were held without charge or trial for many, many years, why are they being rehabilitated? For what? From what? To what?
Well, I mean, firstly, we have to understand that these were individuals that were most likely picked up in the line of war. They were not picked up from their homes. They were not picked up from their marketplaces or from their offices. These were people that were considered to be potentially part of the enemy combatants. So, I mean, as it is in a war of this type, of this sort, where sometimes you are not sure of the real enemy because they are not wearing uniforms, most of them are not wearing military fatigues and all that. It has to be the case that individuals picked up in such vicinity will have to be taken into custody and properly questioned.
Okay.
I think that the issue here is that these individuals were picked up, unlike in the past. They were questioned, assessed, and those of them that are deemed to not be of high security status are released, and something is being done to make sure they help them settle back into normal life.
Okay, and in a moment, I'm going to talk about those who were sentenced, including some of the high-profile people. But Kayode, do you believe that what Philip is saying is true, that, look, in Nigeria, you are innocent until proven guilty. If you haven't committed a crime, you'll be released. But if you were associated with Boko Haram, you're going to be rehabilitated. That this is a good sign of proper checks and balances in a proper judicial system.
Let us put this into perspective. Some of these people have been held for as long as 5 to 7 years. This government has been in power for about 3 years. How will it take a country like Nigeria almost 3 years to determine if someone is innocent of a crime that has not been charged into a court of legitimate jurisdiction? It's quite unfortunate. It's quite sad. This is going to be a breeding ground for the terrorists that everyone is united in condemning and saying they're a danger to our community. I mean, the government needs to actually do better than this. It should not take almost 3 years of a government in power to set people free when they are found not wanting of any crime and they've not been charged of any crime. I mean, guilt by association is something that should be eradicated from any modern society, not to talk of a democratic society as Nigeria would like to call itself.
Okay, so that's an interesting spin on it. So, Philip, let's look at it from this perspective. The fact that somebody might have been in jail for 5 to 7 years was a sentence in itself, right? And the fact that they need to be rehabilitated now, maybe their entire lives were turned upside down. And there are some extraordinary stories. There were mechanics who happened to service a vehicle belonging to Boko Haram. There was a girl who was 11, married against her will to a Boko Haram fighter. These are innocent people. Would you agree that there was an element of guilt by association here, and these people have paid a price because they were rotting in jail cells for 5 to 7 years?
Well, I think that, as I said earlier, I think that in situations of this sort, it's extraordinary, and we have to accept that it's going to be very difficult in the theater of war of the kind that Nigeria has been battling, and as we see across the world, for you at the point of action to separate these individuals. Now, whilst I agree with Kayode, for instance, about the length of time that this government has been in power, I think that Kayode also will have to accept that by the time this government came into office, the level of aggression, the intensity and scope of activity of Boko Haram was such that the first thing that any reasonable government would want to do was to ensure that the enemy combatants were appropriately and well degraded, for some level of normality or peace to return, and then to shift resources to what is going on now.
Okay, good point. So let's ask Kayode. You were asked, would you accept that? Do you accept that?
The fact is that these are not enemy combatants. These are innocent people. By the government's admission, they are innocent people. They've not been guilty of charge to any court. They are not guilty of any crime. Rather than talking about rehabilitation, what the government should be talking about is compensation for the many years of unlawful detention. I mean, these innocent people need to be compensated full time. They need to account for. The government should be apologizing for holding them against their will for as long as 7 years, in some cases, some 3 years, some infants and underage children. So government should be admitting responsibility, and there must be a process in place of speeding up investigation. The military needs to be empowered. The security agencies must have the skills and the manpower to gather intelligence to make sure innocent people are not being held in detentions across the country. One would admit progress has been made in the capacitating Boko Haram's ability to strike in a much more larger scale. But when you hold people against their will just by guilt by association, you create a breeding ground for the terrorists. And when these people go back to their community, they look at those lost number of years in detention, and they get attracted to actually supporting the dissidents. The government would need to hold itself to a higher standard than it held the government in which it replaced.
Okay, so Philip, guilt by association, people held against their will. I know you're saying that this is an incredible context and it's a terrible battlefield, and that's well understood by everybody. Boko Haram are ferocious and terrible, right? But if you were somebody who was caught up in the mix of things, you were innocent, minding your own business, and you were caught up and you spent 5 to 7 years in a Nigerian jail, and then they released you, and then they said, to rub it in, listen, we're going to fix you because you've been brainwashed, or we're going to rehabilitate you rather than compensate you. Isn't that a tremendous insult as a Nigerian citizen who might be completely innocent of any crime?
You see, I think that listening to Kayode speak, I understand where he's coming from, and I totally agree with a number of the issues that he has raised, and as well some of the points you have made. I think that I mean it is absolutely wrong for any individual to be deprived of their rights. I think that it is wrong, But I think that we also have to accept that Nigeria was in a state of total dysfunctionality. That part of the country especially was in total chaos. We had a situation where the military and the security agencies were completely, underfunded. Monies that were meant for activities in these arms of government were just not released to them. We have to accept that things were not just what they ought to be. I agree that yes, it should be the case that the security agencies, the judiciary, the communities should be empowered, to such a level where, people should not just be arrested willy-nilly. I totally agree. But I also want to repeat and say again that in situations such as these individuals, these communities found themselves, I think that differentiating between the word compensation and rehabilitation, becomes a challenge. Now, this government has put in place what they call rebuild, rehabilitate, and I think the third, the R is to restore. So I think that in terms of part of the rehabilitation process should be to ensure that these individuals are empowered. Yes, that should include some level of compensation. Okay. I agree. I mean,
so
there is no doubt whatsoever that
You folded in compensation into rehabilitation. I want to pick up the coin and flip it and look at the other side now, Kayode. The fact that 205 people were convicted, sentenced, including the alleged mastermind of the Chibok abduction, Haruna Yahaya. When you look at that, don't you feel proud as a Nigerian that, you know, these guys are facing justice, and that when you look at operationally on the ground, the fact that Boko Haram are still terrible, still doing unspeakable things, but they're not doing it to the extent that they were in previous years, don't you feel somewhat happy, somewhat pleased?
You have to concede to this government that they've done much more better than the last government in terms of degrading Boko Haram's ability to murder massively. But you also have to look at the higher standard that Boko Haram are still killing in their hundreds. Day before yesterday, there were reports of about 74 girls that are missing till now as a result of Boko Haram attack on the secondary school in Yobe. Bomb blasts are still going on across the northeast region. I mean, billions of dollars, millions of dollars are being donated to Nigeria. The World Bank actually announced that there's a concentration of funds on northeast Nigeria to assist the Nigerian government to build communities and restore confidence on IDPs being able to go back to their communities. But up till now, you still have large, massive IDP camps across the northeastern part of Nigeria. So the government needs to start asking himself, apart from glowing words like 3 hours and so much projections, we need to start seeing results. Yes, Boko Haram is not as deadly as they used to be, but when you see an attack that results in the death of 40 Nigerian citizens, 60 Nigerian citizens, you cannot call that progress. The government needs to actually create a higher standard.
Right, Philip, was President Buhari a little bit complacent in the past when he declared victory, and then we continue to see attacks such as the one that was mentioned by Kayode in the town of Dapchi in Yobe State, where these guys came, they shot up the place, they set off explosives, and as he said, dozens of schoolgirls had escaped from that private school. So we see these attacks still happening. We see Boko Haram still operationally capable of doing horrible things. Is the Nigerian government and the Nigerian military being a little bit complacent here by declaring victory and thinking this is all done?
I agree that probably President Buhari was rather in a hurry to have declared victory. But I think that my understanding of all of this is that in the kind of situation that the country was in, he must have come to the conclusion, being an ex-military general himself, that the capability of Boko Haram to carry out their disastrous and wicked acts had been sufficiently broken. You know, up to this time, Boko Haram has still committed their crimes. But I think that Nigeria is also in a very difficult position and difficult place, because you have these fighters not localized to one country. We have a problem that covers almost the entire Lake Chad region into the Sahel, and therefore mobility and international sponsors are able to keep strengthening the arms of even the remnants of the Boko Haram individuals. Plus, we are having other security challenges up in the northeast and spreading across the country.
Right.
So I personally feel that our military personnel are doing a gallant and brilliant job, but I think that they have reached a point when they have become really, really overstretched.
Okay, so let's get a final...
Just last week or so, you had them be deployed.
Okay, so Kayode, do you agree with that?
Yeah.
They're doing a good job, but they're massively overstretched, and that might be a worry.
Then you ask yourself, what happened to the so-called multinational joint force that the Buhari government promised Nigerians that they were going to cooperate better with Chad, Cameroon, those neighboring countries, and we're going to have foot on the ground that would put Boko Haram on the defensive and take over and try to take control of our borders. If you still have elements coming in through those porous borders, it means the so-called joint cooperation is not working well. Yes, one must admit the gallantry of the Nigerian soldiers. They are thinly stressed. They have to go across the country. They are now in Benue trying to take care of the farmer herdsmen crisis. But you have to ask yourself, sometimes what they say, what the government is saying, and what we're seeing on the ground do not add up. There's a need for a multinational joint force, boots on the ground to take care of Boko Haram so that the Nigerian military can concentrate on other tasks before it. One of the other things that the territories that are liberated, the facts on the ground as these territories and these local areas are not being occupied because IDPs are not confident enough to come back to those territories. You don't have a local police, you don't have local security agencies that are confident that Boko Haram will not come back and attack those local areas. The government needs to actually look at a much more clearer, holistic approach to this crisis. Yes, they are doing well, but that well is not good enough for millions of citizens in that part of the country who expect that they will be safe from attacks from terrorist groups.
Right, and that's strongly put, and I think that'll be a cap to the discussion. Gentlemen, you know, more than 2 million people displaced, 20,000 killed. It's almost hard to believe that Boko Haram have been around since 2009. That's 9 years already. They still haven't been defeated. Remains to be seen if the Nigerian government can actually defeat them. But for the moment, I have to move on. So Philip Idaewor and Kayode Ogundamisi, I thank you both for joining us here on the Newsmakers.